Okay. Testing. According to this, we've been live for 8 seconds. With an automatic quality of 360p, that's not great. Okay, well, let me go ahead and test out this URL link so I can see about sending it out to other people. Is this going to work now? Okay, no, the link is up. Okay, good. Yeah, no, it's working. They just gave me bad information.
All right. Okay.
And we've been disconnected, according to the video. That's not great. Okay, no, the link is up.
All right.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, it's working. They just gave me bad.
All right. Okay.
All right, we still seem to be up. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and send this link out then. So we've got 2 viewers. Interesting. Haven't even started yet. Maybe it's both of us watching. I don't know. To whoever's watching, if it's me or someone else, don't worry. We'll be starting in about 3 minutes. So just getting the information ready. Share. Copy link. Okay. We just lost 1 viewer.
Yeah, just 1 second.
Why did I just hear my opening music?
Because I was trying to find your link here.
Why are you doing a pause? Okay. Oh, yep.
Yeah, I can see on the live channel, basically playing with you. It's so fun.
All right. Get this sent out to a couple more people. Oh, you got 3 viewers. Interesting. Yeah, whoever's watching, we're starting in 2 minutes. If you have any questions, also feel free to type.
All right, I just posted it on my Facebook feed also, so maybe we'll get some more people.
All right.
Oh. I know I'm one of them watching, so I'm disconnected. So there will only be 2 in a moment.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Okay. one last link to post, and then we're getting started.
All right.
I'm going to put it up on my Facebook as well. And hurry up. Let's not keep our viewers waiting.
Yep.
What is going on? Oh. Someone just tried to call me. Oh, we got 4 viewers now. Okay. We are starting in just a moment. Sorry, it's taking me a little bit longer than I intended, but we will get this going. I'm sending out one last post to my Instagram, and I'm going to use the hashtags to help get the interest going.
All right.
Okay. I do have a few followers on. We just lost 2 of them. Blast. I have a couple of viewers, or a couple of followers on my Instagram, other Nihonshu YouTubers. So, and it seems like I've got a couple of restaurants following me as well. So that's always nice. Okay. All right, let's get started.
What?
So, hello everyone. This is MatthewInNihon coming to you with a very special live stream. And here I am with my good friend.
I'm Chris Travers. I run the World Traveler Cooking YouTube channel.
Ah, yes. And so, Chris, I know that you've spent a lot of time in Asia, as have I.
Yes.
So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and explain some of your background and
Sure.
experiences.
So I think the story basically goes back to around 2003 when I got married to a woman from Indonesia and initially moved to Indonesia for about 6 months because we were having some difficulty getting her visa. Then later in 2010, we moved back there for 4 years. And then basically was living in Jakarta that whole time. Traveled around a lot to Malaysia, Singapore, that sort of area. From there, I got tired of living in the tropics, and we decided we didn't want to move back to the US, so we moved to Sweden for another 2.5 years, and now finally I've been here in Germany for, I think, almost 3 years now.
Okay. All right. And I think my viewers might know I basically got started by going to China to teach English. And ostensibly there is there where I connected with several local Chinese who owned a Japanese restaurant that I would always eat at. And from there, I was connected to several Japanese businessmen, and they just happened to like Nihonshu. I happened to like Nihonshu, so we all like Nihonshu together, and we became good friends. And eventually, they basically said, "You should go to Japan, visit Japan. You love Japan." I was like, "Okay, sure." And I went to Japan, fell in love with it, and after a couple of years, I decided to move here to study Japanese and, try to learn as much as I could about culture and definitely drink as much Nihonshu as possible. Speaking of which, I am actually just finishing up the Nihonshu I just finished reviewing, which, let me try to make sure I recall the name correctly, was called, Shibori Tate, which was a Honjozo, and quite interesting. The review will be up tomorrow, but I'm also going to go ahead and finish up this Nihonshu called the Kaore, a Junmai Ginjo Nama-chozo, which I bought just recently and I enjoy. So how about you, Chris? Will you be joining us and drinking anything, or just hanging out?
Yeah, I think I will. I have a Badish Gosa. So Gosa is this wonderful sour wheat beer from some parts of northern Germany, and so a lot of the sour wheat beers are fairly light, very lively. This one is fairly bitter, but what makes Gosa particular is not only do you have a lot of bitterness in the hops along with the sour wheat, but you also typically there's also some salt added, so it's a slightly salty, bitter, sour beer.
Okay.
There's nothing quite like it, and it has usually a slightly, almost a coriander flavor.
That's interesting. I've never heard of a coriander flavored alcohol. I definitely want to try it.
I should tell you stories about Sweden and the things they put in alcohol there.
Yeah, Sweden. I've heard very interesting stories about Sweden. And I have a couple of interesting stories related to Sweden, but not directly in Sweden.
Well, the thing is that like the Swedish schnapps tradition is all basically derived from medieval medicine.
That's interesting. How so?
Yeah. So basically, so once they started doing distilled beverages, one of the key things that distilled beverages were used for was to concentrate and preserve herbs for medicinal concoctions.
Okay.
And so, like the typical Swedish or Danish schnapps is basically vodka that you've put caraway in and used to make sort of a caraway infusion. Also, commonly they put dill in them. They sound very, very strange. They do go very well with fish, I would say. But you have a lot of other mixtures as well, and they are, by and large, all about, well, we had this idea for medicine at one point, and so that's what you drink in midsummer or Yule or stuff like that.
I recall a while ago having a conversation with a friend where we were trying to hypothesize as to exactly what humanity's first discovery of consumable alcohol was and why they continued to do so. Because you could almost imagine that the first time someone drank alcohol, they probably got really drunk.
Yeah, I would bet that it would be fermented fruit, just because you don't have to deal with converting starches. And oftentimes this fruit has yeast on the outside. So fruit tends to be something you can spontaneously ferment. Grains don't spontaneously ferment in the same way. All
right, I got it. So what would you say, what's your experience with alcohol in Indonesia? Yeah, I never hear much about specifically Indonesian alcohol.
So, well, actually, Indonesian alcohol is really interesting. The most interesting alcohols they make in Indonesia, you almost don't find in most parts of Indonesia at all, because of the fact that the country is majority Muslim. And the most interesting alcohols they make are made mostly by the Chinese minority for export purposes. So this is like Batavia Arak, for example, which is it's kind of like a whiskey and it's kind of like a rum, and it's usually aged in teak. Bali also does Bali Arak, and you can find that there. But in some ways, just as interesting are the very local, very widely available and accepted alcoholic foods. And these aren't really drinks. These are you take cassava root and basically you mix it with the same things you use to make sake, actually. And the mixture of the cultures will break the starches down into sugars, and the yeast will go ahead and convert those into alcohols, and you get this really wonderful paste that you can eat for dessert. It's actually really interesting. Then the other thing in that category is tape hitam, which is basically the same thing but with black rice. And so you can imagine it being kind of like a rice wine, but served more as a porridge.
Let's see. Oh, it looks like we've got a couple of people commenting. A Chris Kick and Wadui. That's an interesting name, Wadui. Why do you call yourself Wadui? Are they friends? I'm not sure if they're friends of yours or not, but they're talking about how it's Ramadan and they're talking about bintang beer.
Oh, bintang beer? Yeah. Bintang is the local Pilsner.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I might have to try it someday. Although Nihonshu is my thing, so.
Yeah. Well, I think like tape hitam and tape puti you'd probably like a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I might have to look into that. Actually, I remember the first time I was shortly after I first went to Beijing, and one of my coworkers decided to take me out to meet her husband and some friends and kind of give me a welcome to China dinner, and they pulled out baijiu, which was my first real encounter with traditional Chinese rice wine. And to be fair, actually, ever since that night, I have never had a baijiu I thought was good. But that night, the baijiu was interesting. It had sort of a natural nutty note to it. But drinking baijiu, in my experience, is like drinking lighter fluid. I swear, you could just pour it into a lighter and it would ignite. It's dangerous stuff. Very dangerous. Fun with a party, especially if you want to get everyone really drunk. But
well, so just on the comment about Malaysia, one of the interesting things about sort of Indonesian Malaysia is that basically Guinness has basically licensed a whole bunch of breweries in the area. And as a result of that, you have all of these basically Guinness breweries. Guinness is essentially a cheap beer over there, but it's not sort of as rich and sour as you get it elsewhere. But you do see things like Guinness breweries making an imperial stout with 10% alcohol or stuff like that.
Interesting. Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I'm set up to respond to people properly. But this program don't seem to want to cooperate with me. All right, so Guinness. Huh? And this was in Indonesia?
You do have a Guinness brewery in Indonesia. You also have a big one in Kuala Lumpur.
Oh, Malaysia.
Yeah.
There's a brewery in Kuala Lumpur?
Yes.
That's interesting. Okay. think I need to look into that a bit more. That is, Well, I guess that serves as sort of a decent segue. So, what was your first experience with Nihonshu?
Well, I guess the Nihonshu, I believe there was a Nihonshu made by the place in Forest Grove, I believe, right?
Yeah, yes, sake one.
Yeah, and I remember drinking it actually with you, and we took the tour of the brewery there and found out that the brewery had been consecrated by a Shinto priest that I actually knew personally because he was up from basically near where I was from in Washington State at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually really kind of cool. I really liked that sake brewery, and I've been up to this guy's Shinto shrine like almost every week for a couple of months.
All right, it looks like I've gotten access to the chat now. I think Chris responded to when I asked why is your name Warui. This Chris Kick character responded with, "He's a bad boy." I don't know if you know, in Japanese, Warui is bad. So, and then of course they're talking. When I mentioned Baijo, again, Chris is like, "Oh, Baijiu is bad." Yeah. I mean, it depends on what you're drinking it for. If you're drinking it for quality and culture, you're not going to get a lot out of it. But if you're drinking it to get really drunk, it's perfect. And after the first shot, you don't care anymore. So,
well, and I also see the comments about Carlsberg. I will say very bluntly that most of your common Scandinavian beers are not ones that I like very much. That includes Carlsberg. It includes most of your Swedish beers. Basically, Scandinavian beer is very, very fairly monotonous in my view until you get out into some of the craft areas where maybe you see some licorice beers or some of the pascals and stuff like that.
I remember in China, there was an expat bar that my buddies and I would go to called Gillies. Shout out to the Gillies if you're watching. And for a long time, if I remember right, they always had Carlsberg. It was the cheapest beer, so a lot of us would go there just to drink Carlsberg. Especially that last year, because my last year in China, I was specifically trying to save as much money as possible in preparation for coming to Japan to study and paying for school. So I was a little disappointed when they removed Carlsberg from the menu, but for a long time that was the cheapest I would drink, because I think it was like close to $2 for a draft glass. It was about, if I remember right, it was about 15 to 20 yuan. But I don't like. I drank it because it was cheap, not because I thought it was great. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I think I kind of understand what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, basically everything's either a fairly light lager or it's an IPA, and there's almost nothing else in I would say the southern half of Sweden, Norway, and all of Denmark, until you get into seasonal beers and some of the craft stuff. And some of that's very nice, but it's a different thing.
So in your time in Asia, what were some of the more standout memories that you have?
Well, I think the most interesting one was when I was cooking this beef rendang with my wife's grandmother. And rendang is a very dry beef coconut curry, or usually beef. You could do it with other meats. It's basically a way to curry meat in a way that is shelf stable almost. So you could take a bowl of rendang and cover it and leave it on your table for a week, and it's not going to spoil because basically you've cooked this until you cook this in this coconut milk curry until the coconut milk's all evaporated and it's all in, very fairly dried out, dense meat chunks in what amounts to a spiced coconut oil.
Actually sounds interesting. I'd almost like to try that.
Yeah. Actually, I plan to do that for my next video, so next week.
All right. Yeah, when we finish this live stream, I'm definitely going to have you plug your channel and talk about that.
But another, I guess I would say one more was we were some of the times I've been to other parts in Indonesia, I went to Padang and just ate this wonderful food. Sate Padang, curried, some rendang, curried fiddleheads, that sort of thing. And Padang was very, very, very foreign to me in terms of concepts like working toilets, but it was. But it was really amazing in terms of food.
Okay. Oh, geez, you had to mention toilets, though. I still remember. It was. I think it was my second week in Beijing. This one day, somewhere I have a photo. If I can find it again, I'll have to share it. But I was walking with my roommate because we were staying in a hotel during the training period at my job. And we were just exploring around the Forbidden City. But unfortunately, the Forbidden City was closed that day, so we didn't get to go in. But we kind of wandered around the back roads and found ourselves looking at this public bathroom that had this sign with all of these bizarre warning, do not enter labels all over it, including one with a full-on biohazard gas mask logo on it. Another that had a beware of falling danger. And I swear, it seemed like the kind of public toilet where if you went inside, you were in danger of falling in and dying due to nauseous gases just suffocating you.
Yeah.
So we took pictures from outside, but we didn't go inside.
Well, I don't know if you follow Language Log. This is kind of wandering well off topic, but they had a picture of a sign in a restroom, or the sign of on the door of a restroom somewhere in China, and the Chinese, I think they explained, said something like, "Be careful when opening door." And they translated this into English as beware of person behind the door.
Yeah. Okay, well, it seems like we have a question for you.
Sure.
Another Chris, working toilets? What is this working toilet you're talking about? It worked?
No, it didn't. I'm going to leave it at that.
I find it interesting that your name is Chris, and there's a guy named Chris who's in the chat. Is this you just posing questions to yourself?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think either of us is that desperate for views, but I had to ask. I'm going to tell them to feel free to ask. Chinese toilet equals method for population control. I have heard stories that would support that hypothesis.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other thing about Padang, and then I'll bring this back to the question of sort of food and drink and stuff, is going up to this place called Bukit Tinggi and being in the car, this local individual driving, and the traffic rules being such that while I feel comfortable driving around Jakarta, which surprises a lot of people, I'm not sure I feel comfortable being in a car on the mountain roads in Sumatra. People were passing each other over blind corners and stuff like that. But then we stopped at this one place and ate durian, and it was just wonderful.
Wait, you ate durian and you enjoyed it?
Oh, I love durian.
What's wrong with you? I love one of my former coworkers' descriptions for durian was, it's sort of nasty, gassy, kind of tastes like a fart.
I have a great description of it, partly because it explains to a lot of people sort of the difficulties with it, while also explaining to people who like it maybe what other people's difficulties are. I have heard it called the blue cheese of fruit.
I guess that would make sense. Because when I first tried durian, I actually almost liked it. It had this kind of nice mango quality to it, but unfortunately, very shortly after that, the fruity qualities of it were completely overpowered by the gassy qualities of it.
Well, so there are tons of different kinds of durians, and they react in this way in different ways. I can understand why you would say that about certain kinds. I would also say that a lot of times the other side is that you go from like from a very fruity side to almost a cheesy side. In that it's the same sort of rich flavor in your mouth that you would expect with like a sharp cheese. It's just going in a different direction.
And I have heard that if you're going to enjoy durian, it really depends on where it comes from. So it could be, I had Chinese durian, so take that.
Never tried it.
I mean,
no, my favorite kind is Musang King, but which is from Malaysia. But there are a bunch of wonderful kinds in different parts of Sumatra, including Padang and Medan.
Yeah.
And yes, Musang King is expensive.
Oh, I know who Wadui is. Of course, I know Wadui. Yeah, in response to you, Wadui, yep, totally. We should do that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question, and then I'm going to take a second. I'm still here. I just need to go connect my cord because my computer is about to run out of battery power. I've been filming.
All right.
I finished filming one of my Nihonshu reviews, which is why I have all this stuff on the table. So, Chris, what is your favorite place in Indonesia? Well, you go ahead and answer that. I'll be listening, but I'm gonna go get this.
So, my favorite place in Indonesia is actually the area around Yogyakarta. Jogja is a really interesting place for a bunch of reasons. One of them is that while Indonesia is a republic, Jogja is a monarchy embedded in it.
Is a what?
A monarchy embedded in the greater republic.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And the reason it's still a monarchy is because when the fight for independence happened, most of the monarchs sided with the Dutch, but the monarch of Jogja sided with the rebellion, and that was part of why he held on to power afterwards. But
I see.
Jogja is a wonderfully interesting place. You have a lot of great food. Central Javanese cuisine puts coconut sugar in everything. Well, not everything, but almost everything. But on top of that, you have Borobudur right by, which is the largest Buddhist monument ever built that we know of. And you have Prambanan, which is this Hindu temple complex that goes up for about, I think, 50 meters, all with fitted stone, no mortar or anything in it. It's just blocks of stone, blocks of carved stone piled on each other.
I see. And you said this was the biggest Buddhist monument that we know of. How big was it?
Basically, it's a hill that they terraced and then coated in rock and carved.
Okay.
I would say the hill itself is, I'd say there are 9 levels to it. So I would say it's probably, each one is probably, of the first 7 are probably maybe 4 meters. And then the top ones are less, so I would say no, it's definitely big. I would have to look up the metrics, but
okay, yeah, I'm curious because I seem to remember. It's possible I'm misremembering, but I seem to remember when I was in China, I went to Lishan. I might be pronouncing that wrong. The tone, at least. But it's a smaller city in Sichuan province, and it's famous for having a giant stone Buddha. And I remember being under the distinct impression that it was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, maybe it was statue of Buddha in the world. I seem to remember thinking it was one of the biggest monuments, but I'm probably wrong. Asia is a big area, and there are a lot of giant statues of Buddha. So.
Well, this does not have giant statues of Buddha, and it's not a temple. It's basically, you can imagine it is as this. Basically, it was built to be this walking monument, basically meditation. So you walk around the base, you go up a level, walk around, see all the carvings of stories as you go up one level past one level, each level. After you get up about, I think after 5 or 6 levels, instead of going on these angular sort of almost rectangular pathways, what you end up doing is going in these big oval pathways, and instead of carved rocks, everything's very abstract. So the idea is that you can meditate on all the stories, and these are concrete, and as you get towards enlightenment, everything gets very abstract and there are no more stories. And it's just stupas.
It sounds interesting. I guess the big question is, does it end up being a bit like China, where you have all these places that were meant to be spiritual places for meditation and worship and respect, but just get so inundated with tourists. Lishan especially. I remember going down the cliff sides, and we were waiting for, I think it took about an hour just to get down the cliffside due to the sheer number of people in the lines.
I mean, you have a lot of tourism there. It would make it. I mean, but at least when I was there, I mean, granted, it was during the middle of the day and it was really hot, but you could. I mean, you had enough space to be able to walk around and meditate if you wanted to. But you're right; it is pretty crowded.
Okay.
Prambanan is very different because it's not as famous, but it's also much more interesting in the sense that, I mean, they're both really interesting, but it's also, I mean, it's much more of an architectural marvel because, Borobudur is just basically this, meditation pathway. Prambanan was a royal temple complex for the Hindu royal family, and so they were built for different reasons, and
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and I mean, Japan is an exception. Japan is, they've kind of found that right balance. They have these really beautiful temples with a lot of history. They're tourist friendly, but they're not. It doesn't. When you go there, it doesn't feel like they are specifically designed for tourists. They feel like it's kind of, this is a spiritual place. This is an ancient place. Please show respect. But also, yes, you're a tourist. Come and see. We want to share our culture with you. There's that kind of balance. Whereas in China, it always felt like, and I mean no offense, because I do love China, and I love all my friends in China. But whenever you would go to a temple, you would just have people everywhere and shops everywhere and everything. It felt like it was designed for the express purpose of selling things.
Well, I mean, so in Indonesia, you typically have all of these sort of ad hoc stalls everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't really bother me. You do see a lot of people, but that's typically that you'd see a lot of that around Borobudur, not so much around Prambanan. But while I was just doing this, I was looking this up. The Borobudur was built using 55,000 cubic meters of andesite that had been mined out of a local quarry.
Ooh, that's cool.
That gives you an idea of how much rock they put around the side of this hill.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Well, I have finished this Nihonshu, so I'm going to go ahead and pour myself another glass. And if you have something with you, let's go ahead and toast, shall we?
Okay.
Give me just a moment. All right. Kampai.
Goodbye.
And to everyone watching, kampai. I hope you're drinking with us. If you're not, why not? This is a drinking channel. Come on. Okay, give me just a second. I'm going to go ahead and see if there's any comments. Ooh, I remember my first time to Hakone. There's this beautiful torii gate by the lake, perfect for pictures because it looked so tranquil. Assuming you're okay queuing up for 30 minutes. Yeah, sounds about right.
Hakone is the place that has the...
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. 2 things. Chris says that if you're ever back in Bali, try some ayam bertutu, spicy chicken, and bebek bengil, bebek bengil.
Bebek bengil. Yeah, actually, there's a restaurant called, I think, Bebek Bengil that has this wonderful branch out in the middle of a rice field. That's wonderful, and I think I've been there at least once. Wonderful, wonderful food. Like you can get these. Basically, I think they're braised ducks in this. I guess we'd call it a sambal hijau, which is basically a green chili sauce. Really, really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then another comment was, my friend Abisha says garbage chicken and everything beef are 2 great foods in Indonesia.
I don't know what they mean by garbage chicken. But like I mean the thing is, Indonesia in terms of food is interesting. There's a joke that basically translated. It's Neil Armstrong thought he was the first person to the moon, but when he got there, he discovered the Padang restaurant had already been set up.
I can think of a few parallels based on that. Oh God, I love that. All right. Well, I guess this is a good time to go ahead and segue back into Nihonshu. So, if I remember right, you said earlier that your first experience with Nihonshu was the day that we went to Sake One together.
Yes.
Really?
Yes, it was.
I'm honestly kind of
I know of. I could have had some Nihonshu other times, maybe in one of these trips I had to the Shinto Shrine in Granite Falls, Washington. But this was the first time I actually knew that's what I had. That's what I had tried.
Yeah, I mean, because it's definitely true with Nihonshu, and I think you got a sense of it when we were at the Sakagura.
Mm-hmm.
Just Nihonshu is so diverse that
Mm-hmm.
you could have one Nihonshu and another Nihonshu and not realize that they are the same drink, that they're the same kind of alcohol, because they're so different.
Yep.
It's one of the you guys will see it in my next review, but I made a point to specifically comment on the fact that I think we always hear these people say, "Oh, I tried Nihonshu once. I didn't like it. I just don't like Nihonshu." It's like, well, you tried it once, and especially if you had it in America or some other Western country, the quality of the Nihonshu you had was probably pretty bad. It was probably the cheapest Nihonshu made in the most basic conditions, assuming it was made in Japan at all. There's a rather infamous story I will share one day regarding a Sakagura in Texas and how well that worked out, because Texas doesn't have good water. And if you don't have good water, you don't make Nihonshu.
No.
You just don't. And so it's really important to understand that you can't just try Nihonshu once and assume you know it. You have to be willing to try different things. And if you're not interested in drier alcohol, like, that's fair enough, and I understand that. But you want to start with the sweeter alcohol, or the sweeter side of Nihonshu, which can be very sweet, like ridiculously sweet. You remember the plum?
Yeah.
Like, can you go ahead and describe that for the viewers? Based on your
It's been a long time. I don't think I want to try it because I will probably I will probably mess it up. But I remember these wonderful fruity and complex notes in it. I don't know that I can describe it properly at this point, though, because it's been what? How many years has it been?
Good question. I mean, that was the first time we met. I mean, it was.
I think it'd be like 2008, right? So that's 12 years ago.
I can't believe we've known each other that long. Oh, because I remember meeting you, and you're like, "Oh, you're Andy's friend. Hi, nice to meet you." And then suddenly, like, "Oh, this guy's cool. I like him. You're not like Andy's usual friends." No offense to Andy's other friends.
Yeah, but I know what you mean.
But yeah, I remember another one of my friends when he first tried Nihonshu. He's sort of a classic example of someone who doesn't like Nihonshu the first time, but after taking a little time and getting used to it, he loved most of it, or really enjoyed most of it. Because when he first went there, he tried it, but he couldn't stand the drier Nihonshus. He didn't like the flavor, he didn't like the quality. But he did enjoy the sweeter Nihonshus, particularly the plum, which he described as tasting exactly like bubblegum. I don't know if I completely agree with the bubblegum remark, but I can kind of see what he meant. Like, it was very, very sweet, very fluffy. But then once he started with the sweetest Nihonshu, he kind of took the next step and tried the slightly less sweet Nihonshu and found, oh, okay, this isn't actually that bad. It is kind of interesting. And then he sort of gradually would graduate further down the line until he could actually appreciate the drier Nihonshus. It just took a little bit of time and an adaptation, I think, because I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, but with most alcohols, you tend to get hit with the taste of the alcohol or the fermentation first. That's just immediately what hits you with wine. Beer tends to be kind of buried in the fermentation, although not as much. Like, beer can be a little more clear, and you don't have to fight past the fermentation as much with that. But with whiskey, with beer, with tequila, vodka, there's always that heavy fermentation that dilutes whatever original flavors might have been there, if you know what I mean.
Yep. I know exactly what you mean. When you're dealing with distilled spirits, that's certainly true. If you're dealing with wines, maybe, maybe not. For very strong beers, that's often the case. So if you have like a beer that's like 11%, typically you'll get hit with the alcohol flavor first.
Yeah.
But like one of the things that's kind of surprised me is when I actually had a really good port.
You had a really good what?
A really good port.
Port. Okay.
Kind of a long story. I went to a database conference, a post-PG-Conf in Lisbon, and ended up hanging out with some really awesome database developers. Afterwards, went and had dinner, and then went to a port bar, and one of them just bought a round of 40-year-old port for everybody. And that was just, I mean, it's 18% alcohol, but you didn't taste the alcohol. You just sipped this, and it was just this really wide, complex, deep set of flavors.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Should try it someday. Okay. Yeah, but yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to try that out. But I mean, I think in general we do agree. Like beer tends to be a little more open, but Nihonshu is not like that at all. It's the complexity is so direct and upfront that I think you have to train yourself to detect it because you're so used to, especially if you've been drinking for a while, you're so used to drinking the alcohol heavy drinks that you're just not used to immediate complexity.
Right.
And there's this sort of shock where it's like, oh, this isn't like drinking whiskey. It's more like drinking tea.
Yeah.
And of course, every time I describe that, every time I say you have to think of Nihonshu like tea, everyone's like, ooh, that doesn't sound good. It's like, I don't mean it tastes like tea. I just mean it's sophisticated in the same way.
You have to treat it like tea. It's not the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a better way to put it. Yeah. And let's take a minute and take a look at some of the questions that we've been asked.
Okay.
Yes. I do like the sparkling Nihonshu. The plum that we were talking about specifically was a sparkling plum. And it is enjoyable. It's a great dessert Nihonshu. I need to stop saying but it is a great dessert Nihonshu. It's very light. It serves as a really nice side to maybe like a steak dinner. Or you can never go wrong with sushi or sashimi as a pairing. So it's not exactly one I would have every day, though. It's sort of just a special occasion, New Year's Eve, that sort of thing. Let's see here. One very good question. Plum Nihonshu versus Moscato d'Asti. Which one is sweeter?
I think the Moscato is sweeter.
Are you really? I don't. It's been a long time since I've had it, but I swear I remember the plum being sweeter. Could be they're about the same.
Yeah, maybe
styles of sweet. Because the plum had a distinctive candy quality to it. And even sweet wines tend to be a little less fruity and candy-like and playful like that. They're usually erring more on the side of dry. Even the sweeter flavors of wine tend to be somewhat drier, with the exception of this wine that I have in my cabinet now that I bought from the supermarket. It's cheap though. So, anybody or everybody watching, if you have any, Chris Kick, beer is for when you need alcohol but you can't make up your mind.
The only problem is being here in Germany.
Yeah.
Once you get away from the fact that here in Berlin, the most popular beers are all Pilsners, and so you walk in, you have like 100 different varieties of Pilsner. Once you get away from that, like Northern Germany has an amazing selection of beer, and they're so different from each other. So there are a lot of ones with these sour. They'll start with like a sour wheat base. So basically, you start with making your wheat beer, but you let it naturally ferment for a bit before you boil it and add the yeast. And a lot of these are really, really refreshing. And it's just a wide, as I say, completely wide variety of beers in this area. It's quite amazing.
Okay.
I would actually say beer can be as varied, I think, as Nihonshu.
You know, until a couple of weeks ago, I might not have completely agreed with you, but then I didn't tell you about this. I walked into the local supermarket and I found, I'm not joking, suddenly the name escapes me. Jeez. Matcha beer. And I was looking at this can and I was like, that doesn't sound right. That sounds as weird as a beer milkshake. And to my surprise, it turned out to be as good as a beer milkshake. It really worked. Well, it does not sound like it works. You just hear it and you're like, oh God, that's nasty. But like with a beer milkshake, if you take a light beer and vanilla ice cream, they work. The two flavors complement it. If you get a bitter beer like Guinness, you don't. Just don't. It's not going to taste good. The flavor profiles don't match at all.
No, but ice cream and a Guinness might be nice. Like similar to a root beer float, but with Guinness. But
in this case, they managed to get the herbal qualities of the matcha without the bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
And combined it into the beer. And the beer had this really nice craft quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
That made it quite tasty. It managed to be almost sweet, almost dry, but neither. And the matcha really provided more of a, like I said, an herbal quality without drifting too far into any direction. So it turned out to be a nicely balanced beer that tasted fairly good. If you can get past the fact that the beer was literally green. Like, perfect St. Patrick's Day beer. Perfect St. Patrick's Day beer. They've got to somehow give a version of that to Guinness so they can do a special St. Patrick's Day promotion of some kind. Because I have never seen a green beer before, but it was perfect.
Well, here what they do is they take a very sour wheat beer, and they add basically a shot of flavoring to it that's colored green, and that flavoring would be sweet woodruff, so Waldmeister in German, and then that's their green beer here. The alternative is to have a shot of raspberry flavor and have a red beer. But I actually just drink the sour wheat beers as is. I don't have the shots.
Yeah. We seem to have lost a couple of viewers. Oh, a question for you. Have you had any of the Hitachino nest beers?
No, I have not.
Okay. Candied pecans, Guinness, and vanilla ice cream is the shiznit.
Actually, there's a really funny thing that I should mention about that, and that is if anybody knows what a Swedish glögg is. glug is this mulled wine that people drink like at Yule tide and stuff like that. But what Swedes do is they take the mulled wine and they pour it over like dried raisins and cranberries and blanched almonds, and then you sip the mulled wine and then you eat out the stuff out of the cup that's left, like the raisins and stuff. It's just kind of funny.
That's interesting. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and try to shift us back on the topic because we've drifted a little bit.
Of course.
What stands out to you the most about Nihonshu? What was it you appreciated the first time you drank it?
That's a good question. Well, the first time I remember drinking it would be, again, 12 years ago. And I just remember the wide variety of different, the wide variety of the different sakes that they had at Sake One. And I remember this being like one of those that just kind of stood out in terms of sort of complexity and depth and, you know, the sorts of things that you'd think about just in terms of, appreciating it. As I say, it's hard for me to remember super vividly because it was, as I say, 12 years ago, but it was definitely a really enjoyable experience, and I do remember the complexity and refined nature of the flavors on it.
Yeah. And it only gets more interesting when you start to understand the differences between the different grades and styles. I mean, personally, so I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to explain my backstory a little bit because I don't know that any of my viewers know my full backstory, with the exception of a couple of friends. Again with the ums. So when I turned 21, I was living in a small town called Forest Grove, Oregon. It's a very small town. The only thing that makes it noteworthy in any significant way is the fact that it has a university. And so it turned into a bit of a college town. But beyond that, nothing really. However, it also happens to be the home of the very first official Japanese-sanctioned and American-owned and operated sakegura. The name of the place is called Sake One. And it was 2 blocks or 2 streets away from where I lived. If I left the house I was living in at the time, it would take me less than 2 minutes to walk there. And when I became old enough to drink, 21 in America, I had a bunch of friends who wanted to get me drunk, and they tried to introduce me to all kinds of things, whiskey, beer. At first, I actually didn't like any of them. But one day I decided to walk into Sake One because it was right there. And when I tried Nihonshu the first time, I was immediately impressed by how interesting it was. And I kind of decided at that moment that this is my favorite alcohol. Immediately, I just appreciate it. I love it. I love everything about it. I love the taste. I love the complexity. I love the culture. And this is at a time when I wasn't even particularly in love with Asia or Japan. Going to China, coming to Asia had never even crossed my mind. They were things I was curious about a little bit, but I was never like my friends who were obsessed with Japan back then or always watching anime. I was very picky with anime, still kind of am. But I really went down the rabbit hole on Nihonshu. And Sake One, specifically, started out as an import business, working with 2 major Japanese sakeguras. Murai, who the Japanese don't seem to know that much about, but they make very good Nihonshu, and Yoshinogawa, who are pretty famous and popular around Tokyo. Since then, they've become also the primary distributors of Hakutsuru in America and a couple of other brands. So their influence has been growing, but they also make a domestic product, mostly ginjo. They have something called the G and the G50, which are technically daiginjo. They're prepared to a degree. The rice is polished to a degree that would make them technically a daiginjo, but because they don't make it traditionally, it's a very Americanized Nihonshu. It is not considered a proper daiginjo. They've experimented with it a little bit, but they've never come up with anything consistent that they were willing to market. At least, as far as I know, it's been a few years since I've been there. And their products seem to have changed. They do seem to be importing from some other companies now. However, they're a great place to go. If you are in America, I strongly recommend you try to look for a brand called Momokawa or Moonstone. Oh dear, I think we've lost Chris. I hope not. Oh, there he is. Still there? Oh dear, I cannot hear you anymore.
I'm here.
Oh, there, I hear you now. Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Yeah, so that's where I really got my start. And when I was there, I learned a very simplistic variation of the grades of Nihonshu. They taught me about the three major grades: Futsu, Ginjo, and Daiginjo. And as far as I knew, those were the only versions that existed. Of course, there was Nigori, which means cloudy or unfiltered Nihonshu, where the bits of rice that have made it through the fermentation process aren't filtered out. That Nigori usually is more on the sweet side, but you'll also find it in Futsu, which is, well, it's usually served hot to cover up the flavor, but that depends on the brand. I've since discovered that Futsu can be quite complex and interesting in its own right. Then, of course, there's Junmai, which we've also covered, is sort of the organic version of Nihonshu. But that was it. Ginjo, Daiginjo, Futsu, Junmai, Nigori. That was all I knew, really. Ever since I've come to Japan, I've discovered that there's so much more complexity. There's so many different levels and grades that I am only beginning to learn, and I'm enjoying it. But there is still much to learn, and it's worth it. And I completely lost the point of me telling that story in the first place. Maybe Chris can remind me.
I can't remember. I just think you were trying to explain why you were interested in Nihonshu and stuff at the beginning.
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, that's really what kicked it off. Again with the M's. Jeez. I got to practice that. So, yeah. That's what got me started. That's what kicked off my interest, and that's kept me sustained. Ever since then, I've learned to enjoy whiskey, bourbon. I can enjoy wine, beer. Still don't like tequila. Don't like vodka. Rum, also not my favorite, but I'll drink them. So,
well, I would say one thing in vodka's defense. Sorry about the background noise. Is that it's not really something to drink. It's a canvas to paint on, and then you can do whatever you want to with it there.
Yeah, that does seem to be the best use for vodka. That's true. It's almost like shochu, which is another kind of Japanese alcohol here. You don't drink it straight. It's not meant to be consumed straight. You take shochu, you put some ice in your glass, you fill it up halfway with the shochu, then you fill the other half with water, and if you have sort of a pickled plum, you drop that in as well. Then it turns into a very interesting drink. Somewhat more akin to martinis or gin. But that's another one I do drink from time to time. So, Chris, have you continued to drink Nihonshu in the time? Or have you had many chances yourself?
Just periodically. I wouldn't say regularly. It's not super accessible in in Indonesia. And in Sweden, basically, all of the liquor is very expensive because it all goes through the state monopoly, which is Systembolaget. And here in Germany, sometimes I've had it, but there's basically I'm close to all the wine places, so that's what I've been having instead. But I do periodically have it. I went actually. I was actually in California last year, and I went into a store. I figured I would get some, maybe a bottle of wine or something to celebrate with some friends. And looking at it, suddenly found myself in the sake section, and I found a nice Nihonshu, which had been, in fact, imported by Sake One.
Hey! One of these days, I've got to contact Sake One and tell them, "Hey, I'm doing Nihonshu reviews now," because as far as I know, they have no idea. Yeah. Then again, the last time I spoke to them, they had no idea who I was because all of the old management had left, and I've been living in Asia so long, they've all forgotten me.
Yeah.
But there was a time when I was going there at least almost every day of the week, every week, and they sometimes used me to help train new employees. Like, yeah, you're a new employee. You have to practice giving the tour. Use Matt. He's here all the time. He knows all the stuff. He's good practice material. Matt, would you mind? I'm like, yeah, sure. All right, let's take a minute and check some of the questions we've got. We have 5 viewers. Oh, that's funny. Wait. Chris Kick. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Chris Kick, that mention about shochu, was that made before or after I started talking about it? Because I didn't see it before now. Let's see. Chris Kick, Oregon Trail, Matt. You did not die of dysentery. Hooray! They have canned chuhai out there. I'm guessing that's it. I don't know. It seems we have at least one person watching us who does not like this live stream. His response was, anyone know any good pharmaceuticals that would knock me out for about 13 hours and if possible erase my memory of the last 30 minutes or so? Well, I appreciate your honesty. Let's see. I don't like the... Oh, okay. We got one question. Do you guys smoke weed? No, I don't.
No, I did a couple times in college, but never really liked it.
And another question for you. Chris, do you like Japanese whiskeys?
I've only had a couple of them.
Which ones did you have?
I don't even really remember. I would say so far the ones I have tried, I have tended to like. But then, most of my go-to whiskeys have either been Scotch whiskeys or Irish whiskeys, and they're a little different, I think. But Kevalen, that's one of the ones I tried that was Japanese, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I actually... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say... I guess I would describe most of at least the Japanese whiskeys I've tried is that they taste to me very much like a relatively unpeated Scotch, which is nice. It's just, being where I am physically, it's typically been a little bit, quite a bit harder to come by the Japanese whiskeys than the Scotches and the Irish.
Okay. Fair enough. Oh, I just got informed. I spoke the name. I pronounced his name correctly. Kick.
Awesome.
Great. What? Porno? Sleazy music in the background? Oh, jeez. Okay. Yeah, but I really enjoy Japanese whiskeys. Actually, they're very very interesting to me. So far I haven't found any Japanese whiskeys I thought were bad. A couple of Japanese whiskeys I thought were okay, not amazing, but okay. Like I could drink them. And then Suntory is sort of king out here, especially their Yamazaki 12-year single malt.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. But there are a few others. I've been enjoying Kirin. Kirin has a whiskey that's rather enjoyable. There's a new brand I just bought, but I can't remember the name right now. At some point, I will be doing occasionally reviews of beer and whiskey and different Japanese alcohols, but my channel is obviously primarily going to be Nihonshu. So, Jack, I'm sorry. It's an interesting question, but we got to keep this at least partially family friendly on this channel. I realize I say that after having mentioned the word porno, but let's see. Were there any other questions here? I cannot find it. So I think we're going to go ahead and proceed for just a few more minutes, and then we're going to bring this to an end. But if there's if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to ask. Why don't we go ahead and use this as a moment for you to introduce your YouTube channel?
Sure. So basically, recently with the quarantines and stuff. Okay, so basically, my day job is that I manage a database team at a company here in Berlin, and partly as a way of kind of trying to entertain my colleagues and sort of make new friends and things like that. Once or twice a week, I had basically been using the kitchen to cook various kinds of food. And so I've made various things that interested me from various places I've lived. If you've ever heard of a Swedish smorgastorta, if you've never heard of one, this is basically a highly stylized sandwich that kind of looks like a dessert cake. So I started doing a lot of these things at work, and then the quarantine came in, and I felt like, well, maybe I should start doing it remotely to kind of keep my colleagues happy and maybe extend it. And that's why on my YouTube channel I don't have I don't typically say please like, comment, and subscribe, because it was primarily done initially for colleagues. But then basically, so I decided to do this as a regular weekly feature. And so what I try to do is I try to come up with interesting dishes from places I've lived or where I've lived or worked. And then I can give some discussion of what the dish is like, some background, how to cook it, things to think about when you're cooking it, that sort of thing. So I already have a predominant, the predominant stuff is mostly Indonesian right now, but I hope to have some more Swedish and American dishes there very shortly.
All right. Well, that's good. And if I could manage to get out of paying for school and afford to buy proper vegetables and things again, I might actually be able to cook some more interesting ethnic food to compare with Nihonshu. Oh, sushi and Japanese food is, of course, a great basis for Nihonshu reviews, but sometimes it's also quite interesting to see how Nihonshu will compare when eaten with Indian food or Chinese food or Swedish, American, Indonesian. Different styles of food can work, and one of the remarkable qualities of Nihonshu is that because it's so diverse, it can almost be used for anything.
One thing I would think about in this regard would be taking a look at the nasi goreng sambal mata, and take a look at pairing that one with some Nihonshu. First of all, it's a fairly easy dish to make. It's basically just leftover rice and some eggs and chicken and chili peppers and lemongrass and some other things. It doesn't really take a lot of, it's a very, very simple dish to make, but it's also full of these various strong, fragrant flavors. And I think that if you were to pair it with something with depth and complexity, you might actually have some interesting surprises there.
That sounds interesting. I do want to try that. I'll have to get you to send me that recipe later when we finish this.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if I can afford the ingredients to cook it, but no, I could. I might make it a special thing. I try to. Being a student means I have to save my money, which is not something I'm used to, being as old as I am and as experienced I am. I've been an English teacher for years, so it's weird throwing myself back into being a student and not having money again. It's like, I really just want to work.
It's hard to come up with things that are less expensive than fried rice, though.
Yeah, I mean, tofu here is pretty cheap, so I'm going to try to experiment with some stuff on that. But and also I'm trying to allot myself a monthly budget. Once, maybe twice a month, I'm going to allow myself to cook something that I enjoy. It still has to be on the cheaper end of the scale, but something different from the usual routine. Based on what I've chosen to eat in accordance with my budget versus what I actually want to eat. So I'll see about giving that a try. Maybe I can do that as a special pairing next month with my food.
Yeah. And this one particularly doesn't really have a lot of exotic ingredients, so it should be relatively easy to make. Something that should be, I think, one of the I would say it's a wonderful sort of starting dish, but there's a lot of complexity to it. So you might get some nice surprises.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the comments to see if there's any last questions. Hey, you've got a new subscriber. He's a chef, so I think he's interested in what you're working with. And okay, Matt, let's order pizza and pair it with some sake next week. Yeah, that actually could be interesting. I wonder what kind of Nihonshu would pair with pizza. Pizza itself is so kind of overpowering and weird. It would be interesting to try to find a Nihonshu that you could pair with pizza without the pizza overpowering the Nihonshu and providing interesting effects. I'm going to have to look into that. There has to be something. There has to be. But
it would also depend on what you put on the pizza, right?
Yeah, that would heavily affect it. Yeah, what kind of pizza it is.
One of the things that I had that was a really interesting pizza combination that might actually work for this would be pineapple and shrimp.
That might work with the Mio. This one here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I have to experiment with it. Let's see.
Speaking of weird Japanese pizzas, on the comment, I actually had a sashimi pizza once.
That actually sounds interesting. Chris, yes. Nihonshu and Indian food. It would have to be, honestly, if I was going to pair Nihonshu with an Indian food, I would almost certainly want it to be a nigori. Nigoris tend to be kind of strong, bold, and sweet, and creamy in their own way. So it could complement a good curry. I would have to do some experimenting. I know of at least one nigori in America from Sake One that would work. It's a coconut lemongrass that they created, very specifically American, but it's got a nice creamy, fruity, but coconut fruity quality to it that would work with a curry, I think.
That would be really good with Indonesian and Malaysian food also.
Yeah, I think so too. So it really would depend, but yeah, nigori I think would be the way to go there. Nigoris tend to be somewhat bolder and stronger in flavor, so yeah, it's interesting. And Chris, my usual food routine. There's a supermarket near my old dormitory that sells a lot of prepackaged food. I tend to come up with a balance of, in the morning, I have either cereal or I sometimes go for a more traditional rice, dried fish, and miso shiru. For lunch, I usually go with instant curry or doria, instant doria. I get some extra spices, sprinkle that on, and then for dinner, I usually have instant ramen. I occasionally try to break it up and get healthier foods or something that has more vegetables or fruits to try to keep healthy, but I'm trying to stick to a budget of roughly 1,000 yen or $10 a week, so that I can focus on saving all of my money for paying for school, because school sucks in terms of cost. Yeah. So that's my general routine. Any other good questions? Yeah. Chris asked, sashimi pizza?
So basically, it was a cheese pizza with I think that you take out of the oven, that they taken out of the oven, and after it cooled off just a little bit, then they topped it off with sashimi.
I actually want to try that. I don't think it doesn't sound good to me, but I want to try it anyway. I mean, it certainly sounds better than the American sushi burritos.
Yeah, they have those here too. I have not tried them.
Who thought that was? That just sounds like taking everything good about sushi and making it unhealthy and
taking everything about a burrito and throwing it out the window.
That too, yeah. Calling it a burrito. One of my favorite memories was in China. They have these interesting, I call them Chinese tacos. It's basically kind of an English muffin, like an American style English muffin, like the thin kind of round bread that it usually tastes good when you toast it and put some jam or butter on it. But they take one of those, they cut it down the middle, and then they take cilantro, beef that they've kind of shredded up and diced up, and they've mixed in a couple of other things, and they make it a bit spicy and whatnot, and they kind of put it in between the bread, and it's very, very tasty. It's called a rojiaomo. I might be pronouncing that wrong as well, but if I remember right, it was rojiaomo. And I remember one of my coworkers who was British, I introduced him when he was still new. He had just arrived, and I'd been there for a year. And I took him to this place to try rojiaomo. apparently he really liked them. A lot of people did. But he got into the habit of calling them Roger Moores. And I kind of remember, like, that is the perfect. I mean, I like calling them Chinese tacos, but calling it a Roger Moore, that is perfect. That perfect naming. And the best part is that they got used to hearing it. So you would just come up and say, "I would like a Roger Moore, please." And like, "Oh, Roger Moore. Oh."
That's great.
That was entertaining and tasty.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, guys, I think we're getting to a point where it's time for us to wrap up. So if there's any last questions, go ahead and send them. Have either of you found a way to work Nihonshu into the bedroom? I would need a girlfriend for that. If I had a girlfriend, I would find a way to make that work out, but I don't have one. So right now, the only time Nihonshu's in my bedroom is when I'm crying myself to sleep. Okay, not really, but I actually do, and like before I go to bed, I might enjoy a good Nihonshu. It helps calm me down, relax me, help me get into sleep. So, heck yeah, sushi burritos are awesome. In response to my statement about English muffins, he's like, in England, they just call them muffins.
Well, there's here I've seen something they call temaki, which kind of seems like sort of like a sushi burrito done right.
Mm-hmm.
So
could be interesting. All right, well, let's go ahead and call this a night. It is officially midnight here.
All right.
So, Chris, thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing
me.
your experiences and thoughts. And we might have to do this again sometime. I'm kind of hoping that I might be able to do some more conference chats with other people. I definitely want to try to get some more interest in Nihonshu going, and if I can try to get a couple of other channels interested in sharing experiences, especially crosstalk about alcohol, food, and Nihonshu. I think that's a good thing. But
tell you what, if you try the nasi goreng and you try it with the Nihonshu, then maybe I should have you on my channel talking about it also.
That could be fun. Yeah, love to see about that. Yeah, and okay. Well, Chris, cheers, kanpai. Thank you for coming on tonight. And to all of my viewers, kanpai. And I can't let this stream end without telling everyone, seriously, always be willing to go beyond the horizon, try new things, and drink Nihonshu. Until next time, take care, everyone.